Let's get more on that top story. The Nobel Peace Prize being awarded to the European Union. Joining us live now from central London is the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. Mr. Farage, welcome to BBC World News. So you've been phoning José Manuel Barroso to say congratulations, well done.
I think the whole thing's a nonsense. I mean, if anyone's seriously suggesting that a democratic, stable, post-war Germany would have invaded France again with the intention of smashing it to smithereens, I would suggest they're misreading history. I don't believe there was any prospect of war happening in Western Europe after 1945, and arguably projects that take different nation states, force them together under a new identity, a new flag and a new anthem. If they do it without the consent of the peoples, far from creating peace, this can actually create war, as Yugoslavia has showed us. So I'm baffled by this prize, as I think the viewers will be, because the last big European story was Angela Merkel going to Athens, and there we saw swastikas being flown, and Europe now being dominated by grief, violence and division.
So you've completely omitted, or you've forgotten, what the Cold War was about then?
Yes, the Cold War was about NATO and the nuclear deterrent. The fact the Russians didn't invade us had absolutely nothing to do with the European Union, which after all wasn't actually fully created until 1992.
So you're saying the European Union now is not about freedom, it's not about law, it's not about human rights, it's not about reconciliation?
It's about the destruction of nation-state democracy. Mr. Barroso was perfectly clear 1 month ago in Strasbourg. National democracy has to go. It has to be transferred up to a European level. And that is being done without consent. And far from making the peoples of Europe love each other, what has actually happened is the Eurozone has divided Europe north to south, and there are increasing, growing enmities and violence on the streets. We are headed in a very bad and I think dangerous direction.
I was talking to Carl Bildt, former Swedish Prime Minister and peace envoy to the Balkans, just before we started this conversation. Can I suggest to you that he maybe knows a little bit more about peacemaking and peacekeeping in the context of the Balkans and Europe than perhaps you do as leader of UKIP? And he basically agreed with something I put to him, which was this, that yes, in times of extreme poverty, in times of 25% unemployment in countries like Spain and Greece, money does equate to peace. And if you've got a country like Germany, which is prepared to bail out the euro, yes, the D-mark in effect became the euro when the euro was introduced. The exchange rate was exactly the same. But peace does equate to throwing money at a problem in a moderated, respectful way. No. You can bail out Greece twice. You can bail out Greece 20 times. It doesn't take away from the fact that the nation that invented democracy had its democratically elected prime minister removed last year by the bully boys from Brussels, is now in the hands of foreign bureaucrats, and that the public are increasingly angry. And I think we risk in Greece a country that may be headed towards violent revolution. All of it caused because of this ridiculous project to attempt to abolish the nation-states of Europe. And I would say this to Carl Bildt, just look at the lessons of the Balkans. Look at this crackpot idea that we had in 1920 of abolishing individual nations and putting them together under a Yugoslavian flag. It led to disaster, and the EU, sadly, is making the same tragic mistake. So what was wrong when Winston Churchill said, if we lock people together in a fiscal pact, they won't fight each other, they won't kill each other? That basic principle was flawed?
Churchill, of course, didn't want Britain ever to be a part of it, is the first thing to say. And secondly, you know, the experience of two world wars had been utterly crushing on that entire generation, and not just Churchill, Monnet and other people looked for a new solution. Unfortunately, you cannot lock people together economically, fiscally or politically without first seeking their consent. If they want to do it, that's fine. But all the evidence across Europe is that the peoples of Europe don't want to do it. And indeed, when the French and the Dutch rejected the EU constitution, I hoped very much that the project would reverse and we would go back to perhaps de Gaulle's vision of a Europe de patrie, but we're going rapidly in the other direction. And as I say, Europe, I grew up with a Europe that was split from east to west by the Berlin Wall. We're now living in a Europe that is split from north to south by a Eurozone project that was a misconception from the start and that is leading to social disaster in those Mediterranean countries.
Nigel Farage, many thanks.
Thank you.
Joe Biden squaring off against